vamos recolher 2 ou 3 perguntas. A Lilian ajuda aqui a levar o microfone. Peço que as pessoas se identifiquem, façam a pergunta muito rapidamente, 2 ou 3, aí voltamos. I was telling them that we're going to collect 2 or 3 questions here. Then you can answer the questions, and I asked them to pose concise questions with an interrogation mark at the end of it.
Okay.
Right? So, who would like to start? No, Celso. 3 people here. So let's start with Celso Laffer. Would you mind to introduce yourself, Celso?
Celso Laffer, I'm a member of the board of the foundation, and I was President Cardoso's foreign minister. And my question is, how do you view Turkey's position vis-à-vis Iran?
Vis-à-vis Iran. Okay.
Giorgio.
Shall I try to...
Just wait a second. Giorgio, then Cecilia,
Okay.
and back to you.
My name is Giorgio Romano. I'm professor at the Federal University of ABC. I wonder, after so many years that the West has said that they don't want Turkey, doesn't that have an impact on the willingness of Turkey to enter the European Union? Isn't it getting tired and then looking for other kinds of alliances that might end up in connecting with the Islamic world? And I have another question, but I think Peter will go into that relation.
Go. Now, first, ladies at last. And then Peter, in the second round, who will be the first?
Cecilia, for jazz researcher at the University of São Paulo. I would like to ask you about the demonstrations, the recent demonstrations.
Okay.
Shall I take these questions? Yeah. Let's begin with the last one, which is, of course, very much related to Erdogan's behavior in the last term of his government. You see, what is happening, I believe it's very parallel to what is being experienced in Brazil. Since 1980, in this 3 decades, the number of people attending universities in Turkey have quadrupled. So we have now close to 4 million people studying in universities. And these people are, of course, forming a new part of Turkish society, which are putting in new demands on the system. They are much more involved in asking for human rights to consolidate. They are very much in favor of, demands of the ethnic and religious minorities be met. They are very, very much sensitive to environmental issues, and they are demanding that the government does away with this arbitrary and authoritarian way of tackling issues after the recent election victory in 2011. And I think this is the major explanation for what happened in Gezi. The spark was just this barracks they wanted to rebuild in the Taksim Square. The spark in Brazil was just the fares to be raised in public transport in Sao Paulo. But of course, those were just sparks. Behind it was these new demands by the educated urban middle classes, which explains everything. And this is, of course, at this point, it is very appropriate to point to the entirely different positions taken by Erdogan and by President Rousseff in Brazil. What did Rousseff say? I'm very proud of these people because all these demonstrations show that the majority of the democratic system in Brazil. Whereas Erdogan said these are foreign conspiracies to topple this very successful government in order to stop Turkey from developing as it has been doing all these recent years. So, but in this respect, maybe it is also interesting to point to the fact that President Gül, who is the other founder of the AKP, recently in his visit to New York, when he spoke in the United Nations, he once again said, like Rousseff, that the Gezi demonstrations were the sign of the healthiness of democratization in Turkey. So that was remarkable. Now I must also add a few more things. Of course, there were groups who wanted to hijack the Gezi protest. I'm sure that happened in Brazil also. You had some people who wanted to hijack the protest to oppose the Kurdish opening in Turkey. There were also some groups who were ultra-leftist and wanted to create chaos in the country. Those were also interesting parts of these demonstrations. But in the main, all over the country, I think it was this new educated middle classes who were putting on democratic demands on the regime, and that was very healthy thing for Turkey. Iran and Turkey have not fought each other since the 17th century. One is, as you know, a major Muslim power with a Shia majority population, and Turkey, like Egypt, is a Sunni majority country, and they have been very careful since 17th century in their relations not to go into conflictual positions. There have taken place certain in certain periods there have been things when people thought that maybe the differences would boil into some sort of confrontation. But that never happened. But the major factor that affects Turkey's relations with Iran is the energy issue. Turkey is entirely dependent on energy imports, and it's Russia, Iran, and recently Iraqi Kurdistan, which is supplying Turkey the energy it needs, and the needs are fast, rapidly developing, broadening, of course. So despite the fact that Iran and Turkey are very much on the other side of the fence regarding the Syrian issue, this has not affected the relationship between the two capitals, so to say, because Turkey is very much dependent on Iranian energy, and I suppose Iranians are also very much dependent on certain favors of Turkey helping Iran to overcome the sanctions, for example. So these are broad issues, but I'm just able to point to certain things. And the other interesting question about, isn't Turkey ever going to get fed up with the European accession process? Well, the situation is such that, of course, if you look at the surveys in the country, people are increasingly getting fed up with the idea of joining Europe. In 2004, when everything seemed to be going in the right direction, support for EU accession was something like 70 to 75%, but now it's been pretty low. But actually, surprisingly, it's just below 50%. Why? Why do the Turkish people, at least half of them, still have this idea of joining the EU one day? And why does this government of AKP hasn't so far said, we're fed up with you? The main reason is that the EU accession has helped Turkey improve its economy and improve its democracy. And I don't think either the people or the government are now at a point when they would say, okay, the hell with Europe. They're pretty fed up, but we've not reached that point.
Further questions?
All right, second round, starting with Peter.
Yeah, hello. I'm Peter Demand from University of São Paulo. Two questions. You were speaking about liberalization of Turkey. This is also a cultural aspect, also political aspect, has had positive results for the Kurdish question. Now there is an open wound that regards the past. That's the Armenians, the question of genocide that happened in the First World War, and it's the Greek Exodus. You talked about the resettlement of millions of Ottoman Turkish subjects from the Balkans in Turkey, but there's of course also been a large number of people who had to flee what is now Turkey. And this is a little bit a taboo in Turkish politics, although there are some Turkish intellectuals that try to open up. What can we expect in the future, and what would be the consequences within Turkey? The other question that I have is about the relation of the Turkish public opinion towards the Israeli-Palestinian question. We know the Turkish official policies. There has been in the past very close military cooperation. The government of the AKP has been much more pro-Palestinian than the previous governments. It seems to me, also with support of the Turkish public, are there serious possibilities for a rapprochement with Israel without sacrificing the Palestinian interests?
Yeah, very broad questions, of course, but I'll try to
make things worse, we have one more question. There's one and... Okay, yes, go ahead.
Just a question. I'm Helga Hoffman, a former UN official. Does Orhan Pamuk have any political influence in Turkey?
Does Orhan Pamuk have any political influence in Turkey?
But there is another, I understand that there would be three. Yeah, that was my question. But before you reply, I understand that there are three people.
No, I just wanted to check if I understood your question right.
That's the easiest one.
Huh?
That's the easiest one.
That's the easiest question.
Hi, I'm Pierre-Louis Brigand, master student in FGV. I'd like to come back on the democratization process. You mentioned that from 2002 onwards, Turkey has democratized. From 2011 onwards, you mentioned that the process has been slowing down. We've seen the more authoritarian practice of political practice of the regime. Also, Turkey is today the country where most journalists, the biggest amount of journalists are imprisoned for political reason. There are some disagreements about the constitution, and the military has been put under control with the last Ergenekon trial. I would like to have your opinion on the democratization process. Has it stalled? Has it been reverted? Has it just slowed down, and will it continue? Thank you.
You have had enough. So in the last round, there's only one question left, and it will be, but let him answer first those questions and then culminates in the session. You make your question.
Okay, so I continue.
Yeah, you continue.
Okay, well, these are great big questions, of course. The Armenian issue, the Israeli relations with Israel and Turkey's attitude towards the Palestinian question, and the issue that relates to especially the media situation in Turkey, which I am very much part of course. Let me begin with the easiest question. And Orhan Pamuk, is he influential in Turkish politics? No, I don't think so. I don't think Orhan Pamuk has a large influence in politics, but he is, of course, a very controversial issue. Those nationalistic circles, satanize him, demonize him, and are very critical towards him because of his position on the Armenian issue and because of his position as a critic of the government when it resorts to authoritarian and arbitrary measures. So Orhan Pamuk is not a political, how would you say, influence, doesn't have a, well, he's a very controversial issue, but I don't think people would follow with what Orhan Pamuk thinks or suggests. Anyway, now let's turn to the Armenian question, which is important, of course. Now, my position on this is, I think terrible things have happened in Turkey during the First World War. Yani, according to official statistics by the Ottoman government, then a million Armenians have been deported, and probably most of them have died due to massacres, due to other reasons like, epidemics, like starvation. Anything could have happened at that time, of course, and that's a great, big tragedy. And Turkey has to face this. This way or another, Turkey has to place an apology for what happened in Turkish history. That's my major understanding of the situation. But secondly, I'm not one of those who insist on the recognition of the genocide. I think this word genocide, when you insist on recognition of genocide, you're alienating a major part of Turkish society from coming to terms with what happened in this terrible phase in Turkish history. So I've always been writing. I've signed under a petition by Turkish intellectuals that we should apologize the Armenians for what happened during the Ottoman times, but I'm also not coming out and saying that it was genocide and it should be recognized as such. There are, of course, increasing number of Turkish intellectuals who recognize it as genocide, but even the liberals are divided on this issue. Let's come to the, and by the way, this government, AKP government, spent some efforts for reconciliation with Armenia. In 2009, there were protocols signed between the two governments for a gradual normalization of relations, but apparently the Turks were signed under those protocols under the impression that the Armenians would at least give signals of beginning to withdraw from the occupied Azeri territories. But when the Armenians did not deliver anything in that respect, that process has stalled, and nothing has happened since 2009. The Israel issue. First, I should say that the relations between Israel and Ankara under the Justice and Development Party were perfect. They've never been as good. This is what was said by the Israeli Foreign Minister Livni, describing Turkish-Israeli relations at the end of 2008, just before the attack against Gaza. And at the time, Ankara, Davutoğlu, and Erdogan were very much busy in trying to bridge differences between Assad and the Israelis and start direct negotiations to solve the border issues between Israel and Syria. But then the Olmert, Israeli Prime Minister, who was in Ankara at the time, and apparently the declaration to be made to the world public opinion that Israel and Syria are about to start direct negotiations, just like a couple of words in it. The difference was so minimal. But then Olmert went back to Jerusalem, and the next day the Israelis attacked Gaza. And that was a great big personal disappointment for Erdogan and for the Turkish public at large. I mean, it was quite a terrible attack, as you remember. And of course, that was the first blow to Turkish-Israeli relations. And then in 2010 came the Mavi Marmara incident when Israelis attacked and killed 9 Turkish citizens on the ship which was trying to break the blockade against Gaza. But the relations are sour, but they're not broken. Israel apologized for what happened. Now their compensation is being negotiated. And, of course, Israel does not in any way consider lifting the blockade, which is one of the conditions by Turkey. But trade relations continue to broaden. And after differences with Syria and Egypt, Israel has become Turkey's main conduit in reaching the MENA markets. Israel's allowed the Turkish goods to go through Israel and be transported to other markets in the Middle East. So on the surface, it looks pretty bad, but in reality, the relations between Turkey and Israel are not that terrible. One more thing about the Palestinians. Of course, when Erdogan denounced the Israeli attack on Gaza, and when, after the Marmara incident, the relations soured even more, there was a big wave of Erdogan popularity among the Palestinians. And just before what happened in Egypt last summer, just before the military takeover in Egypt, Erdogan was planning to visit Gaza, and he would have done it through Egypt, of course. But when Ankara denounced the military takeover in Egypt, that project totally collapsed. He cannot go to visit Gaza because Egyptians wouldn't probably allow him. And that's another current problem with Turkish foreign policy. How are they going to manage their relations with Egypt? It's a difficult issue because Ankara government, they may be in principle on the right side, but how can you demand that Morsi be returned to power? Who is going to do this? I mean, and when you are the only country in the entire world, including even the Palestinians, don't putting any such demand on the new Egyptian government that Morsi be returned to power, it's a pretty difficult situation. So these are the two most burning issues of Turkish foreign policy, how to reposition themselves in Syria and Egypt is very, very interesting. By the way, another issue that was raised, excuse me, I better take up this media issue. One of the, I've been generally talking about arbitrary and authoritarian ways of Erdogan recently, especially after getting 50% of the vote. He behaves as if, he can decide anything and the people will go along with it. And one of the most remarkable ways he's turned authoritarian is the pressures he's using on the media. But please don't think that people cannot criticize the government in Turkey. In fact, the circulation of oppositional papers is larger than the papers who support the government. So there is quite strong criticism being produced. But what he's doing is he's putting pressure on the big media owners who are dependent on government tenders and subsidies and favors so that they suppress criticism in the mainstream media. That's our major problem. But that doesn't mean that the government is not being criticized. About the people, there's this story being circulated that Turkey is the country with the most number of journalists in prison. It's worse than Iran, it's worse than China, it's worse than, I don't know what, Congo or whatever. This, of course, does not reflect the real situation. Most people who have been detained are people who have this way or another been affiliated with the PKK armed uprising, so that the real reasons are not journalistic reasons. These people have not been detained because of their opinion or because of their reporting. It's because of their affiliation with the PKK, which was the real reason for their detainment. So there are two sides of the story, as usually is.
Okay, now,
Final
do
question?
you have time and energy for...
Of course I do have time and energy, but I should take this to thank everybody present this evening. I really appreciate the interest you have shown. As I said, Brazil and Turkey are in a process of getting to know each other. I'm so happy to make even a small contribution to this process of two countries getting to know each other, and it makes me so happy to see so many of you. I wasn't expecting so many people, I must honestly confess, so thank you all for coming.
Well, I think you deserve a standing ovation.
Bernard Monsier, I'm ambassador of the Order of Malta to Brasilia. I would like to tell you something probably which is not known. The Order of Malta is a Catholic order which has been existing for 950 years. It's an hospitaller order. It was active in Syria. We had to leave Syria for very obvious reasons. And today we distribute help in Syria through a Turkish Muslim organization which is called Blue Crescent, and which is distributing food to Syrian people inside Syria, and we provide them with food and several other ways of helping people, and they are distributed in a very good cooperation between a Catholic and a Muslim organization, the Muslim organization between an organization of your country. I would like to put you questions. Obviously, Turkey is a country of 100 feet, 1 feet in Europe and 99 in Asia. You are surrounded by countries which are Islamic countries, Muslim countries, and they are showing now two basic trends, the Sunnite and the Shiite, and they are fighting all together. Do you think that there is a risk for Turkey someday to arrive at such a situation which is existing in Egypt, which is existing in Syria, or some sort of extremism which is in Iran, which is in Saudi Arabia? That is to say, we are speaking of existing situations. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, we are hopefully about to overcome a very violent situation, and that the Kurdish uprising. I mean, I spoke about 29 Kurdish rebellions, the most violent of which is, of course, the PKK uprising, which has been going on since 1984. One of the merits of this present government, I'm very critical of it, but I must also be objective and also mention the very good things they have done. That's my position. And in the Kurdish issue, this government has, taken steps increasing Kurdish cultural rights. We've come, Kemalists banned the Kurdish language, and this ban, believe it or not, was in place until 1991. And since 1991, gradually, this ban on the Kurdish expression of Kurdish identity is gradually being lifted, and the end result being most Kurds voting for the Justice and Development Party. They have also improved relations with Iraqi Kurdistan, which is an immensely important radical change from what was the previous policy of Kemalist parties. They said, we have to crush the Kurds in Iraq because they are the real sponsors of PKK terrorism in Turkey. Of course, by reconciling or by improving relations with the Kurds of Iraq, the government has proved that this is not the case at all. And this government started from 2006 onwards, started negotiation with the PKK, which would have been unthinkable for any Kemalist government. So we have now reached a stage in these negotiations whereby even Öcalan, imprisoned in on an island for the last 15 years, has declared several months ago that we are not going to wage an armed struggle. Our struggle is going to be entirely political and democratic and legitimate ways. And this is a major gain, of course, for both Kurds, nationalist Kurds who rightfully demand their cultural rights, and for Turkey to solve this important problem, because, Kurds and Turks, the relationship between the Turks and Kurds are not like the relationship between Arabs or Persians and the Kurds. Kurds are very much integrated into Turkish society. Majority of them live in the Turkish majority parts of the country. There is intermarriage to such an extent that it is estimated that 5 million children have born out of mixed marriages between Turks and Kurds. And believe it or not, in Turkish political, economic, and cultural elites, the Kurdish presence is more than their presence in the population at large. And that is why it is so important that there is a peaceful resolution of the PKK problem, and hopefully, and thanks to this government, I must admit that we're moving toward some sort of solution on this issue.
40,000 people were killed, yeah, in this conflict.
Yeah, 40,000 people were killed in this, and most tragically, of course, most of those people were Kurds, either fighting either as PKK fighters or Turkish soldiers, policemen, and Turkish village guards.
All right, that's the end of it.
I wish we could continue because, you know.
Yeah, I think there will be other occasions, I think. Let's make this the first of a series of conversations here at the Institute. I'd like to thank you so much for flying 15 hours from Istanbul to São Paulo.
14 hours.
14 hours.
14 hours.
Okay. And giving such thorough answers. You didn't leave one question behind. And it was really impressive and very good to hear to you here. And I would like also to thank you, Lourival, for the introduction to Sahin and for making this interview here. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for your interest. I'm really very happy that we had this session.